BRICS is growing more powerful. These many nations have asked to join BRICS. And for those of you who don't know, BRICS stands for, most of you probably already know, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. They are the biggest countries involved in BRICS. But here's the GDP posted by Going Underground of each of these countries. GDP of countries that have applied to join BRICS. And this is not including the biggest ones, which is the ones already in BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Okay, so Algeria, 200 billion. Argentina, 640 billion. Bangladesh, 420 billion. I mean, many of these are massive countries. Egypt, 378 billion, which is also very painful to the United States because we consider Egypt an ally. Nigeria, 500 billion. Saudi Arabia, 1 trillion. Thailand, 574 billion. UAE, another U.S. ally, 500 billion. Venezuela, 96 billion. Vietnam, 450 billion. So that's not including the biggest ones, which I'm now going to show you on this chart. This is showing where the BRICS, the larger BRICS economies are slated to go. So this is just Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And right now, BRICS GDP has recently passed the U.S. in total GDP. So BRICS GDP is 16.86 trillion, which is just higher than the U.S. And combine the BRICS bloc as a GDP. Wait a second. Sorry, I misread that. China has a $16.86 trillion GDP. Behind that, the BRICS blocks combined has 26 trillion, which is over what the U.S. has in terms of GDP. So BRICS has passed the U.S. in terms of GDP. This is the rise of the multipolar world. And this is a major, major thing. This is saying the U.S. no longer owns the globe. Other countries are rising in a big way. And China being the biggest, of course. And the U.S. has proven that we are not a good steward of empire. We have created a system that kills millions every year, that is collapsing the world. And I'm not saying that every one of these countries competing with us or whatnot is just pure and wonderful and just hippies dancing through forests. I get this. It's far more complicated than that. But we need a multipolar world. We need countries, or we need people to keep each other in check the way this system currently is. You should want countries to not be able to run roughshod across the world. That's what we should fight against. And so because of this rise of the multipolar world, of these countries standing up for themselves, you have things like what's going on right now in Niger, which I've covered on this show just a few episodes ago. But here's some more details. Niger rejects, and I love this title, the rules-based order. So many of you know that the U.S., because we can't say that, because we can't lay down actual international law that people should abide by because we break it all. Like if we were to say you respect country sovereignty, we don't do that. So each thing we would lay down as a law, we break. You know, we just sent fucking cluster bombs to Nazis in Ukraine, and cluster bombs are banned in 100 countries. So we don't abide by international law. So we can't actually lay down those laws because we would break them all. So instead, the U.S. government has just been saying, we want a rules-based order. And they don't actually say what it is. They just say Russia's going against the rules-based order, which means Russia's going against us, the U.S. So this comical title says Niger rejects the rules-based order. The coup in West African state of Niger on July 26th and the Russia-Africa summit the next day at St. Petersburg are playing out in the backdrop of multipolarity in the world order. Seemingly independent events. This is at Consortium News, by the way. They captured nonetheless the zeitgeist of our transformative era. First, the big picture. The Africa summit hosted by Russia poses, July 27, 28, poses a big challenge to the West, which instinctively sought to downplay the event after having failed to lobby against sovereign African nations meeting the Russian leadership. 49 African countries sent their delegates to St. Petersburg. 49 out of, isn't it 54 countries in Africa? I mean, that's almost all of them. With 17 heads of state traveling in person to Russia to discuss political, humanitarian, economic issues. For the host country, which is in the middle of a war, this was a remarkable diplomatic success. The summit was a quintessential political event. While every now and then the skeletons from the colonial era keep rolling out of the Western closet, dating back to the unlamented African slave trade, Russia taps into the Soviet legacy of being on the right side of history, even resurrecting the full name of Patrice Lumumba People's Friendship University of Russia in Moscow. Patrice Lumumba, many of you know, was assassinated by the CIA. He was leader of the Congo. So ECOWAS, which is the Economic Community of West African States, which is U.S. aligned, has tried to undo the Nigerian coup that has taken out the U.S. puppet, that has removed the U.S. puppet from government. Now, this doesn't mean that the new government is wonderful. I don't know the details of them, but I know that the U.S. is very upset that the U.S. puppet is not in power. That's basically what that's the headline of it all. And the French as well, because it was a U.S. French puppet. So ECOWAS lacks the might to undo this coup. France's stance comes as no surprise. Paris does not want to lose its position. The coup's popular support blindsides the West. A noted Nigerian poet and literary critic, not cricket. This is not an insect, folks. This is not a cricket. It's a critic. Professor Asundare wrote last week, probe the cause, course, and symptoms of the present resurgence of military coups in West Africa. Find a cure for this pandemic. More important, find a cure for the plague of political and socioeconomic injustices responsible for the inevitability of its recurrence. Remember the present brutish anarchy in Libya and the countless repercussions of the destabilization of that once blooming country for the West African region. There's really two big reasons, I'd say, if you had to simplify it too far, if you had to be reductive. There's two reasons for so many coups in Africa. One is the U.S. does a fair number of them, either pushes them or you go back far enough, actively murders leaders. We tend to murder leaders less nowadays because we usually take them out with lawfare, etc., color revolutions. But so that's one reason. The other reason is because Africa was split in 1855, split up by the Berlin Conference into just countries that made no sense. And it sliced families apart. It put warring tribes together. And so you have groups of peoples that never wanted to be a country in this sick idea of something called nationalism. And that creates a lot of instability. And then if there's, colonization by many countries, not just the U.S., but interestingly, Washington has been relatively restrained. Well, I think Washington has been relatively restrained because we're living in a multipolar world now. There's far more countries that are standing up to the U.S. just destroying anything and everything at once. President Biden's espousal of values fell far short of the diktat on rules-based order. Although America reportedly has 3 military bases in Niger, in the multipolar setting, African nations are gaining space to negotiate. Russia's proactivism will spur this process. China also has economic stakes in Niger. Um, but the situation obviously is very hot, is very tenuous. So who knows what tomorrow will bring. But again, as I said when I was covering Niger in more in depth, this shows the difference of a multipolar world.